This lecture is on Muhammad and the Quran. So, in order to understand Muhammad, we need to understand what Arabic society was like, right? What was it like, the kind of context that he was born into, right? What are the characteristics of pre-Islamic Arabic society, right? What is it like to live here in this area here? There's several things. One is the importance of poetry. Poetry was extremely important to the people of Arabia. It was how they were, in a sense, recounted their history. There's not a lot of books, so people would typically recite poetry. And we talked about this with the Greeks, right? That's an easy way to remember stuff because there's rhythm, there's often rhyme. It makes things a little bit easier. So poetry is important. And this is a tribal society, right? This is a tribal society. It is mostly made up of nomadic pastoralists. We talked about them before, but those are people who move around taking care of their herds. You're not going to do a lot of farming in the Arabian Peninsula. There's not enough water. So typically you're moving around with your herds to different oases and things like that. Now, we've talked about tribal societies before, but there's this kind of question, what do I mean by that? And I recently learned a really good explanation of what a tribal society is like. You know who your second cousin is, and it matters, right? Usually among Americans, we maybe know who our second cousins are. Maybe we don't, but it's not really important to us who they are. It doesn't matter. But in a tribal society, who your second cousin is, you totally know who they are. Like, you know everyone who's even distantly related to you, and it's important. If your second cousin has a problem, you have a problem. If something good happens to your second cousin, something good happens to you too. And if you're from a culture where, you have a lot of cousins and you feel responsible for them, that's kind of similar to what's going on in Arabia in this time period. My wife is from the Philippines. She knows all her cousins, and there's a lot of them. And if a cousin, even if it's a distant cousin, has trouble, the whole family's supposed to help them out. That's kind of how this system works. Why? Well, there's essentially no state. There's no government, right? There's no king of Arabia during this time period. There's some small states, but for the most part, there's no government. That means you don't really have a police force. That doesn't mean you have a standing army. If you have a problem, the people you have to rely on to fix that problem is your tribe, right? If you have a problem, you don't go to the police. There's a legal dispute, you don't go to a judge. There's no law code. You got to rely on your family, your tribe. Now, one thing about these tribes is they had religious differences. And you can kind of think about like the city-states in Mesopotamia. They had, they all worshiped different gods. And they had like a tribal god, a particular patron. And they believed, similarly, as we talked about Mesopotamia, that if they fought another tribe, whoever had the best god won. So, and it's not that they denied the other people had a god, they just said their god was better. So your tribe might worship the god of wind, my tribe might worship the god of rain, and so forth. And that helped create even further tensions between the tribes, right? There's no one religion unifying them. They're following, in a sense, different religions. And what makes tribal strife even more deep is there are very limited resources here, right? The resources here are very limited. There is not a lot of water in particular. And it's very easy for fights between tribes to break out over water. And it's often common to engage in raiding. So, you have people, they had domesticated the camel. And so you could go on a raid. There's this tribe near you. You're going to go on a raid and try and steal their animals, right? Remember, these are nomadic pastoralists. They're herding like goats and sheep and things like that. So you're going to go attack your neighboring tribe. You're going to try and surprise them at night, sneak around, and get their animals and run off with them. And that is common among the tribes. So there's conflict among the tribes, struggling over limited resources, raiding to try and take each other's flocks and so forth. And this can easily lead to feuds. You killed my second cousin, I'm going to come get you. And if I get killed, My second cousin's going to come after you. And it just keeps going back and forth. It can just go on forever. And feuds can be very damaging, right? If your tribe and my tribe are fighting all the time, that other tribe, the third tribe, might be looking at saying, oh yeah, let them get weak, and I'm going to come in and beat them both up, right? You know, if you have tribe A, B, and C, and tribe A and B are fighting with each other and engaged in a really bad feud, they're going to weaken themselves, and then tribe C can just come in and defeat them and take the water, take their flocks, take whatever. So what happens, because there's not a state, there's not really like a government, arbitration is very important. So if tribe A and B are having a fight, they maybe know someone from tribe D who they respect. There's someone from tribe D who is really wise, really smart, and is known for being fair-minded. And because they're not from tribe A or B, they can be trusted to make a right decision. Tribe A and B will go to this person from tribe D and say, look, we've got this dispute. Can you settle it for us? And then tribe D, that person, if they're really wise and smart, will figure out a settlement that everyone can live with. The thing, though, I want to stress as well, though, is that this is not a completely isolated area. Remember, this is under the control of the Byzantine Empire. This is under control of the Persian Empire. So the people of Arabia do have contact with the Persian and Byzantine empires. Sometimes, like when they have wars, they will ally with various Arab tribes and even some Arab kingdoms, there's a few, to fight each other. So don't think of this as a really completely isolated area. They are talking to these people. But the thing is, this is mostly desert. It's just not worth it to these empires to really expand deeply into this area. So that these people keep their independence. Though at times, like I said, they will work with the Persians and the Iranians. I'm sorry, the Byzantines and the Persians, but that's more like allies. Now, I need to talk about something else really important, and that is the city of Mecca. So you can see Mecca's down here. Medina's up here, keep that in mind. But Mecca's down here. Mecca's really important. Why is it important? Mecca is where the Kaaba is. What is the Kaaba? The Kaaba is a cube-shaped shrine. I believe Kaaba just means cube. And in the shrine, there is a stone that was believed to be very holy. It was probably a meteorite, I believe. And it's believed by the people today, and I think at the time too, that Abraham, like Abraham from the Bible, actually built this shrine. So Mecca is important because of the Kaaba. The Kaaba is a place, a holy place, this shrine. Now, in addition to, which people believe was made by Abraham. Now, in addition to having this stone in the shrine, there were also the statues of all the different gods worshipped by the different tribes of Arabia, which is kind of weird when you think about Abraham being believing in one God, and then you've got all these statues there. We'll come back to that in another section. So here's the thing. This is a holy place for all tribes. For all tribes in Arabia, this is a holy place. So you're not allowed to fight here. If you do, you'll make the gods angry. They will get you. Right? These people, similar to Europeans in the same time period, believe in supernatural power. Don't mess with the gods. Right? In Christian Europe, don't mess with the saints. Don't mess with the angels. Don't mess with God. Here, don't mess with these gods. So a lot of people are going to be coming here, and they're not allowed to fight. So this also becomes an important center of trade, right? If you're a merchant, you want to be able to go someplace where there's a lot of customers and where you won't have people kill you and take your stuff. Well, Mecca is perfect, right? Because of the Kaaba. There's going to be a lot of pilgrims going to Mecca, right? Because of the Kaaba, there's a lot of pilgrims who are going to come here. And because they can't fight there and they're willing to actually abide by that rule because they don't want to make the gods angry, you can come here and trade and be safe. You'll have lots of customers. So very important. Now, here's at a point where I need to note some issues with studying the history of Islam. Right? I did something similar with Christianity. I need to do, I think, the same thing with Islam. So this is a historical religion. So there's similar issues with Christianity, right? We talked about how Christians make certain claims about history, and how you understand Christian history can affect how you understand Christianity, the religion. And if you talk to different Christians, a lot of times, depending on what kind of Christian they are, they have a different understanding of how Christian history works. What makes Islam is the same. It is a historical religion. it's arguably more complex because, as we'll talk about, whereas Jesus was only a religious leader, Muhammad is a religious leader, a political leader, and a military leader. He actually controlled territory that he administered. He led people into battle. That makes him more complex because he's, in a sense, doing more stuff. There's more room to interpret the different things he did, positively, negatively, in a neutral way. And that makes him more complex then, I think, than Jesus. So just to give you an example, just a bit ago, I emphasized how Arabs had contact with Byzantium and Persia. And one thing I also want to stress is that there were Christians and Jews living in Arabia. There were Christian and Jewish Arabs. There still are today, living in Arabia. Well, not living in Arabia, but in this time period, they were living here. And there's a good chance he had contact with them. He became familiar with the ideas of monotheism through them. But to some very devout Muslims, they would say, no. Muhammad had no contact with them. There was absolutely no influence from the Byzantine Empire. There was no influence from Persia. And the reason that they would argue that is, in their view, Muhammad had to have received his message directly from God with no outside contact, no human interference. For Muslims, Muhammad is just a messenger. And his historical context has nothing to do with Islam. Right? Islam is straight from God with no real human interference in this way. Right? So some Muslims would have disagreed with my statement earlier that there is this kind of contact. And like I'll say earlier, that I think Muhammad was impacted by his contact. Right? So it's complex. And one other thing, and I want to stress that makes this complex, is Muhammad is seen as a perfect man. And when I looked, and so that makes him more like Jesus than David. Now, Muslims do not believe that Jesus, let me start over. Muslims do not believe that Jesus was divine, nor do they believe that Muhammad is divine. But they do believe that Muhammad, similar to Jesus, was a perfect human being. And I like to contrast this. You can think about this like King David from the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament. King David is considered a great king, but it's also seen that he was a sinner. Right? If you're familiar with the Hebrew Scriptures, there was a general that had a wife that King David fancied and wanted to have an affair with, or did have an affair with, and so he could get rid of her husband. He ordered him into battle and got him killed. And the Hebrew Scriptures are very open that David did this, that he sinned. Not with Muhammad. Muhammad is a perfect man. If you're a Muslim and you're not sure what to do, you would ideally look to Muhammad and look at his actions and try and find something he did similar, and that would give you guidance. So whereas a Christian might say, what would Jesus do? A Muslim might say, what would Muhammad do? And I included this slide when I did a search for Muhammad, perfect man. This is what came up. And this is a contemporary Muslim person. Prophet Muhammad was a spiritual mentor, a social reformer, a moral guide, a political visionary, a military genius, a faithful friend, a wonderful companion, a devoted husband, a loving father, and above all, a perfect human being, all in one. No man ever in history ever excelled or equaled him in any of these different aspects of life. So this again makes talking about Muhammad complex. In addition, the main sources about Muhammad were written after Islam was well established. So when you study the history of Christianity, other than Romans saying, yeah, Jesus was a criminal, you can't really find anything much about the Romans saying anything bad about Jesus, but you can certainly say the Romans saying lots of bad stuff about Christians. And you can actually tell a lot about Christian history from using Roman sources. It's a little bit harder to do that with early Islam. The sources that we have of early Islam and Muhammad's life are generally written by Muslims. And of course, it's nothing, I'm not singling out Islam for criticism and Muslims for criticism. It's just, especially in ancient history writing, you're going to have a kind of bias towards your subject, right? If you believe Muhammad is a prophet of God, you're going to write about the history about him in a certain way, right? So you have early Christians. Christians thought that their religion was right and they wrote about themselves, but we also have writings in which the Romans wrote about Christians and thought the Christians were wrong. We're missing those with Islam. So a lot of what I'm going to try and do then is try and focus on understanding things from an Islamic perspective, while at the same time saying, trying to bring up some critical issues that historians would raise. I'll do my best, right? But I think it's important to mention these things and also just so you can understand what makes this history so complex, and so you can get a better understanding of how Muslims view their history.